Kevin Costner has finally spoken the words that fans had been wondering about for years, that the chemistry audiences felt between him and Whitney Houston was real, just not in the way people expected. It was never a secret romance hidden from cameras, yet it was also never just acting. From the moment they stood together in The Bodyguard, something deeper than performance reached the screen, and viewers felt it instantly. By the time they met, Costner was already a Hollywood force, disciplined, guarded, and used to carrying responsibility alone. Whitney was the most celebrated singer in the world, stepping into her first film role while the weight of perfection followed her everywhere. What formed between them was not passion, but trust, protection and belief at a moment when she needed it most. Years later, after Whitney was gone, Costner's words finally gave that bond a name. If it was not romance, then why has it endured longer than so many love stories, even now? Whitney Houston entered the early 1990s as one of the most recognizable voices on the planet, yet fame had already begun to isolate her in ways few people could see. Her songs were everywhere, played in homes, churches, and celebrations across America, creating the impression of a woman fully embraced by the world. Applause followed her constantly. Understanding did not. Behind the success lived pressure that never loosened its grip. From the beginning, Whitney's talent set her apart, and that separation only grew as her career expanded. Raised in a family where music carried history and expectation, excellence was never optional. Every performance was measured against perfection, not growth. Audiences did not come to discover her anymore. They came to hear what they already believed she represented. Over time, that expectation hardened into a standard she was required to meet, night after night, without visible strain. By the start of the 1990s, Whitney was not just a singer. She was an image, a symbol of vocal purity and grace that left little room for human uncertainty. That image brought admiration, but it also demanded composure at all times. Doubt, fatigue, or fear had no place in the public version of her life. Even moments of rest were closely watched. The higher she rose, the narrower the space became. When the opportunity to star in The Bodyguard emerged, it arrived at a complicated moment. On paper, it looked like a natural next step, a global superstar expanding into film. In reality, it represented risk. Acting required a different kind of exposure, one that stripped away the protection music provided. On stage, her voice could carry emotion without revealing everything. On screen, silence spoke just as loudly as sound. Whitney understood what was at stake. This would be her first major film role, and critics were already skeptical. The scrutiny was immediate and unforgiving. She was expected to succeed without learning, to arrive fully formed in a medium that punished mistakes. That pressure followed her into rehearsals and preparations, making confidence harder to reach than audiences ever knew. Despite the fame surrounding her, Whitney needed reassurance more than recognition at this point in her life. Success had not removed fear, it had sharpened it. Every step forward carried the risk of disappointment, not only for herself, but for the millions who believed they already knew her. Trust became rare in an environment where admiration often came with expectation. The character of Rachel Marron reflected much of this reality. A woman adored by the public, protected by layers of security, yet emotionally isolated. She lived under constant observation, surrounded by people, but alone in essential ways. The role required restraint, vulnerability, and patience, qualities that did not come easily when the world expected effortless brilliance. As Whitney prepared to step into this unfamiliar territory, she was not searching for reinvention or escape. She was searching for steadiness. She needed an environment where learning was allowed and fear did not signal failure. More than anything, she needed space to be present without performing. This was the Whitney Houston who approached The Bodyguard, not simply a superstar, adding another achievement, but a woman standing at a quiet crossroads. The world saw confidence and grace. Beneath that surface lived caution, responsibility, and a hope that this next chapter might offer something fame never had. What she could not yet know was that the bond formed during this time would come not from romance or spectacle, but from being seen without expectation and supported without demand. Kevin Costner arrived at the early 1990s from the opposite direction, carrying not vulnerability, but authority. By that point, Hollywood had already decided who he was. He was dependable, disciplined, and steady under pressure, the kind of man studios trusted when the stakes were high. His rise had been gradual, earned through patience rather than flash, and that slow climb shaped the way he moved through the world. Born in Linwood, California in January of 1955, Costner did not grow up imagining fame as a destination. Stability mattered more than spectacle. After graduating from California State University, Fullerton, in 1978, with a degree in business, he approached acting methodically, taking lessons, working small roles, and waiting for momentum to build. Early films came and went quietly, but he stayed. Persistence, not luck, carried him forward. When success arrived in the mid and late 1980s, it did not come as chaos. Silverado, The Untouchables, and Bull Durham introduced him as someone audiences believed immediately. Field of Dreams revealed a softer dimension, while Dances with Wolves confirmed his authority behind the camera as well as in front of it. By the time that film reshaped his career, Costner was no longer simply acting. He was leading, producing, and making decisions that affected entire productions. With that authority came a carefully maintained distance. Costner's public presence was controlled, measured, and reserved. Interviews rarely wandered into emotional territory. Personal details remained private. On screen, he gravitated toward roles defined by responsibility. Men who stood watch rather than sought attention. Lawmen, protectors, guardians. Characters who carried weight without asking to be seen carrying it. That pattern was not accidental. It reflected a man who valued order, preparation, and control. Hollywood rewarded those qualities, and Costner mastered them. By the early 1990s, there was little left for him to prove professionally. Financial security was established. Respect followed him project to project. His reputation rested on reliability rather than excess. Yet the structure that supported his success also shaped his inner life. Responsibility left limited room for openness. Relationships existed within boundaries, often secondary to work and obligation. Emotional expression was not required to succeed in his world, and over time restraint became second nature. Strength was expected. Composure was assumed. As a producer, Costner was known for his focus and protectiveness over projects he believed in. He paid attention to atmosphere, to the way pressure affected people, and to the importance of steadiness on set. Chaos disrupted work. Calm allowed it to happen. That instinct made him effective, but it also reinforced distance. He led from a place of structure, not intimacy. This was the man approaching the Bodyguard. Not restless. Not searching, certainly not chasing romance. The film appealed to him because it reflected values he understood deeply: loyalty, duty, and protection. Frank Farmer was a character built around boundaries, and Costner recognized that mindset instinctively. He knew how to stand between risk and responsibility. At this point in his life, Kevin Costner did not need transformation. His career was intact. His authority unquestioned. What remained unexamined was something quieter. The cost of always being the steady one, the protector, the man who carried weight without revealing strain. He had learned how to show up for others without asking much in return. That is where his path quietly begins to meet Whitney Houston's, not as opposites, but as two lives shaped by similar restraint. Before they ever worked together, Costner had built a life defined by control and reliability. What he had not encountered yet was a connection rooted not in performance or expectation, but in presence. That kind of bond would not announce itself loudly. It would grow in silence, shaped by trust rather than desire, and it would begin only after two guarded lives crossed paths at exactly the right moment. When The Bodyguard finally moved into production, it brought Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston together, at a moment when both were accustomed to standing alone. The project carried high expectations from the start. Costner was not only starring in the film, he was also producing it, which meant every decision reflected his judgment. The responsibility was familiar, yet this story required something different: patience, emotional restraint, and trust built over time. Costner had been involved with the project for years, and from the beginning he believed Whitney Houston was right for the role of Rachel Marron. That belief mattered. At the time, skepticism surrounded the idea of a music superstar leading a major romantic drama. Crossing into film had ended many promising careers, and doubt followed the production closely. Costner did not respond with public defense or spectacle. He waited. He adjusted schedules. He stood firm in his decision and allowed the work to speak for itself. On set, their connection developed through routine rather than drama. There were no exaggerated moments meant to create headlines. Instead, trust formed through consistency. Costner approached the work with calm authority, creating a steady environment where pressure did not dominate every interaction. Whitney arrived prepared and focused, learning a new craft while carrying the expectations of a global audience. That balance required discipline from both of them. Their on-screen relationship reflected that reality. Frank Farmer was written as a man defined by boundaries, someone who protected without crossing lines. Rachel Marron lived under constant attention, admired yet isolated, surrounded by people who wanted access rather than understanding. The dynamic depended on restraint. Every glance, every pause, every moment of silence mattered. What audiences later described as chemistry came not from excess, but from control. Behind the camera, that same rhythm existed. Costner did not attempt to direct Whitney's performance in a personal way. He allowed space for learning, offering steadiness rather than instruction. Whitney responded with commitment, taking the role seriously and respecting the structure around her. The work required patience, and patience became the foundation of their bond. As filming continued, the trust between them deepened, not through confession or intimacy, but through reliability. They showed up prepared. They respected each other's boundaries. They shared responsibility for a project that carried enormous pressure. That kind of partnership does not announce itself loudly, yet it leaves a lasting impression. When The Bodyguard was released in November of 1992, audiences responded immediately. The film became a global success, and the connection between its leads became one of its defining features. Viewers felt something genuine, even if they could not name it. What they were responding to was not fantasy. It was the presence of two people moving in sync, grounded in trust rather than performance. Away from the spotlight, the bond did not disappear when filming ended. It had not been built on fleeting excitement. It was shaped by shared effort and mutual respect, which allowed it to continue without needing to change form. There was no need to explain it publicly. It existed quietly, sustained by the same values that created it. For Whitney, the experience marked a turning point. She had crossed into a new medium and succeeded under intense scrutiny. For Costner, the project reaffirmed something he had always understood, that protection did not require possession, and belief did not need to be loud. The work had brought them together without forcing either to become someone they were not. This was the heart of their bond during The Bodyguard. Not a romance hidden from view, and not a myth created after the fact, but a partnership grounded in trust at a critical moment. Two people accustomed to carrying weight met each other with steadiness and respect. That quiet alignment is what audiences sensed then, and what continues to be remembered long after the film itself became history. After The Bodyguard left theaters, the world tried to turn Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston into a story it already understood. Audiences had watched their restrained connection on screen and assumed it must continue the same way off-screen. Hollywood had trained people to expect romance where chemistry existed, and anything quieter felt incomplete. Yet their real bond did not follow that script. There was no confirmed relationship announced, no public transition from co-stars to couple. Instead, what remained was contact, respect, and a connection that did not need constant visibility to survive. Costner and Houston did not distance themselves from one another, but they also did not invite speculation into their lives. The bond they had formed was not dependent on proximity or headlines. It had been built on shared work and mutual understanding, and that foundation held without explanation. As Whitney's life became more complicated in the years that followed, public attention intensified. Her struggles were dissected in ways her successes never had been. The same voice that once unified audiences now became the focus of relentless scrutiny. Through it all, Costner never positioned himself as a savior or spokesperson. He did not speak for her, and he did not speak over her. His presence remained consistent, supportive without intrusion, visible only when appropriate. What fueled rumors was not evidence but expectation. Fans wanted a romance because it offered resolution. It turned a complex connection into something familiar and easy to categorize. Friendship between a man and a woman, especially one marked by emotional depth, felt unsatisfying to a culture trained on dramatic arcs, but their bond resisted that simplification. Costner's language when speaking about Whitney stayed remarkably steady over time. He spoke of her talent with reverence. He described her as kind, gifted, and deserving of protection. His tone never shifted toward possession or regret over what never happened. Instead, it reflected care rooted in respect. He did not claim her story. He honored it. Whitney, for her part, did not publicly define their relationship either. She acknowledged his support and professionalism, but she kept the details of her personal world guarded. That restraint mirrored the way their connection had always functioned. It existed without performance. It did not ask to be validated by public agreement. Years passed. Careers evolved. Lives moved forward in different directions. Yet the bond did not dissolve into nostalgia or fade into a footnote. It remained present, not as a chapter revisited often, but as something understood. That kind of connection does not require constant renewal. It holds because it was never dependent on circumstance. What is often overlooked is how rare that is. Many relationships tied to success, fame, or intense collaboration burn out once the work ends. The absence of structure exposes what was never stable to begin with. In this case, the opposite occurred. Without the film, the bond remained intact, because it had never relied on the film alone. The public continued to speculate because silence invites interpretation. Yet silence was the point. Their connection had always thrived away from excess explanation. It was not defined by labels, and it did not change shape to satisfy curiosity. It simply continued, steady and unclaimed. This period after The Bodyguard revealed the truth of what they shared. It was not sustained by proximity, romance, or obligation. It endured because it had been built on respect, trust, and restraint. While the world searched for a story it recognized, Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston lived one that did not need translation, and that quiet endurance would give his words, years later, a weight no rumor ever could. In February of 2012, the quiet nature of Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston's bond was finally revealed to the world, not through rumor, but through grief. Whitney Houston's death stunned the public, yet for those who knew her personally, the loss carried a different weight. When her funeral was held at New Hope Baptist Church in Newark, New Jersey, the gathering reflected her legacy, family, faith, and music. What few expected was that Kevin Costner would step forward to speak. Costner did not arrive as a celebrity paying tribute to another celebrity. He stood at the podium as someone who had known Whitney away from the stage and away from applause. His words were not polished for performance. They were deliberate, steady, and deeply personal. From the first moments, it was clear that he was not there to summarize her career. He was there to honor her humanity. He spoke about her beauty, her talent, and the way people responded to her presence. But he also spoke about how often she had been misunderstood. Costner addressed her directly, reminding her that the world had not just liked her, it had loved her. The tone was protective, not nostalgic. He did not romanticize her struggles or reduce her life to tragedy. Instead, he centered her worth, her gifts, and her right to be remembered with dignity. One of the most widely remembered moments of the eulogy came when Costner referred to Whitney as his one true love. The words landed heavily, not because they suggested romance, but because of how they were delivered. There was no claim attached to them, and no explanation offered. In that space, the phrase did not describe possession or a relationship defined by time. It spoke instead to devotion, belief, and a bond rooted in respect. Costner also spoke about promises. He reminded Whitney that he had once told her he would not let her fail during The Bodyguard. Standing there years later, he kept that promise in a different way. He defended her legacy publicly, when she could no longer do it herself. He spoke calmly, even as emotion surfaced, and his composure only amplified the depth of what he felt. The eulogy revealed what years of silence had protected. Their connection was never about spectacle. It was about presence. Costner did not frame himself as a rescuer, nor did he place himself at the center of her story. He stood alongside her memory, steady and respectful, just as he had years earlier on a film set. The consistency of that posture mattered. Those watching saw a side of Kevin Costner rarely displayed in public. The guarded actor, the disciplined producer, allowed vulnerability to surface without losing control. It was not dramatic. It was sincere. In that moment, the bond he and Whitney shared became undeniable, not because it was explained, but because it was felt. What gave his words such lasting power was their restraint. He did not recount private moments. He did not correct rumors. He did not define the relationship for anyone else. He simply spoke truthfully, honoring a connection that had never required public approval. The impact came from what was said and what was left unsaid. In that church, surrounded by family, music, and memory, the bond between Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston was finally visible in full. Not as a love story shaped by romance, but as one defined by belief, loyalty, and protection. His words did not rewrite history, they clarified it. Only after she was gone did the world fully understand what had endured. Not a relationship built on possession or promise, but one grounded in respect that lasted beyond careers, beyond rumor, and beyond time. And in speaking for her when she could no longer speak, Kevin Costner revealed the truest expression of love he had ever shown: steady, unwavering, and finally out loud. The bond between Kevin Costner and Whitney Houston was never meant to be measured by romance or explained through rumor. It lived in steadiness, in belief offered without demand, and in protection given without possession. What they shared did not fade when the cameras stopped, or when their lives moved in different directions. It endured because it was built on trust, respect, and presence at moments when both of them needed those things most. For many women who have lived long enough to understand the difference, this story resonates not as fantasy, but as truth. The deepest connections are not always the loudest or the longest. Sometimes they are the ones that hold quietly, shape us deeply, and reveal themselves only when it matters most. Kevin Costner never rewrote their story. He simply honored it. And in doing so, he reminded us that love does not always arrive as romance. Sometimes it arrives as belief, and stays as loyalty, even now. For more emotional stories, check out this video.